r AskReddit. Folks who knew somebody in school who would later make the news for being charged with murder. What was that person like? Went to high school with Jimmy Holmes, the Aurora theater shooter. Same graduating class, same circle of friends. He was a typical nerd like the rest of us, into anime, video games, MTG, Edit, Magic, The Gathering, during lunch in the calc teacher's classroom. He was a bit eccentric, but we all were back then, trying to fit in with other weirdos. I never knew about his mental health illness struggles. It was sobering to see him on the news. It didn't register that it was him at first. He looked like a completely different person. And not just physically. His eyes were the most striking part. You could almost see the mania. They didn't look like that before. This is the kind of stuff I was hoping for when asking this question. People who knew, like, highly publicized criminals, though I am of course interested in everyone's answers. I always wonder which ones were none of us saw that coming and which ones were oh, that guy. He was voted most likely to become a serial killer in high school. Not murder but manslaughter. He was popular, cocky, well off, entitled, but really no different than most of the preppy rich kids. He wasn't even really a bully so much as a jerk. I was not cool nor popular, but I got to know a different side of him as his tutor. Despite his popularity and stunningly good looks, dude could have easily been a model. He was dyslexic and would stutter if he got nervous. He wasn't dumb, but he struggled to learn and covered his insecurity with bravado. Anyway, about a month after his 21st birthday he got into a bar fight. From all accounts both he and the victim were equally drunk, equally belligerent, and fighting over the typical stupid shit young drunk men fight over. He caught the other guy with one of those 1 in a million punches that killed him. Despite having considerable family wealth he didn't fight it, took responsibility, and pled guilty without a plea deal. He got 7 fixed with 13 indeterminate, got paroled at 10. Note, the victim's family asked parole be denied at the 7-year hearing, had no objection to release at 10. We stayed in touch and I can say this guy took what he did very seriously, spent his incarceration working on his education and bettering himself, and is now out, staying sober, working, and engaged. Wow dude. What a guy. That's actually really inspiring. My mom knew someone like this. He and his brother were piss drunk. His brother tried to take the keys and drive and he wouldn't let him. They got into a fight. He punched his brother, and the brother fell, hit his head on the curb and died. There's a Sword and Scale episode all about 911 calls. It has the most chilling recording I've ever heard in it at the end, but earlier in the episode is a recording of a 911 call about 2 brothers. It's the GF of one of the men calling for help after her BF and his brother got into an argument at a bar. One of the guys had just had a bad breakup and was just really ruminating on it, and his brother got so wound up about it he told him that if he was so sad about it he should just kill himself. So when they got home his brother shot himself with a shotgun that he had handed to him. In the call you can just hear the older brother screaming in the background over her brother's dead body. I had to call my little brother just to check on him after hearing it. Edit. As I understand it, the older brother was trying to call his brother's bluff. I don't think he actually wanted him to kill himself. She was my childhood bully and I always thought she was a psychopath. She ended up convincing her boyfriend, a fair partner, to kill her husband, father of her children, while he was on leave, army. Convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. This happens relatively often. Usually the woman convinces the boyfriend that their husband is abusive. He usually isn't, but they just want him out of the way. The boyfriends want to protect their girlfriends from getting hurt, so they agree to murder, even if they weren't inclined that way naturally. Very sad. To be fair, a guy's already gotta have something wrong with him if he can be so easily convinced to commit homicide. A girl tells me her partner is abusive. My thoughts would be we need to make a plan for you to safely get your stuff and find somewhere to stay. Document evidence and file a police report rather than oh yeah, plotting to shoot him in the face makes sense. One case that I know of, the wife was extremely good at manipulation. She told her affair partner that she was pregnant with twins that were his. Then that her husband was beating her and that she'd miscarried as a result of it. She gave him fake ultrasound photos, faked pregnancy on video chat, they were long distance, put on makeup to make it look like he'd badly beaten her, etc. When she left him after he murdered her husband for her, both out of anger that he'd killed his potential children and for beating the woman he loved, the guy eventually ended up killing himself. She had another boyfriend waiting and just played this guy so hard he ended up murdering someone and killing himself. Some people are just really good at manipulating someone who would never otherwise murder. Before we get to the second story, please press the red subscribe button below if you're enjoying this so far. Guy named Chris, always acted like a tough guy. Wasn't fun to be around at all, just a dickhead at all times. In a bar, he lost a game of pool, ran his mouth to a bunch of guys bigger than him, got the shit beat out of him, came back and shot up the place killing a couple people. Doing life and probably still a dickhead. I always wonder what goes on in the brains of people who resort to such measures after pretty squabbles. Going to prison for the rest of their lives over an insult at a bar. I can't tell if they think they can get away with it, or if they don't even consider the consequences because they are driven by pure impulse and have zero long-term planning skills. Like, I wonder how sane people who have no mental illness can still have brains that work this way. There is an estimate that 25-40% of inmates are undiagnosed with ADHD. There's another estimate that 75% of people diagnosed with ADHD wind up abusing drugs or in jail. People with ADHD are also more likely to commit adultery. One of the major issues for people with ADHD is the impulsive reactions. They struggle to think about consequences before committing to an action. I've got ADHD as well, but I guess my struggle with impulses and goal-directed behavior have always been more in the realm of I know I should do this important task, but I can't resist the urge to catalog all my comics or watch 12 hours of YouTube instead of I just dropped thousands of dollars on a new motorcycle I didn't plan to buy until 6 seconds after I saw it, or that guy made me really angry and I couldn't resist the urge to deck him. I guess I got off easy. Kinda strange dude but very quiet and soft spoken. Good at pencil drawing. About 5 years after high school he took a kitchen knife in each hand and stabbed his uncle to death. Drove to his girlfriend's house, took a shit in her front yard, forced her into the car and drove her to another state. Let her go and turned around and drove back. Asked to use the phone at a gas station and was told no until the cashier looked up and realized he was absolutely covered in blood. Called the cops and surrendered. Never saw that one coming. Was it a psychotic episode? None of that stuff sounds like it was rational. No way for me to know for sure, but he did have a schizoid vibe about him growing up. It manifested as more negative symptoms, but I guess your early 20s is prime time for your first psychotic episode. Attempted murder. She always had an excuse for why she did bad things. Cheated on tests. She didn't have time to study. Stole money from work. My bills were due. Hit her husband. He was too feminine. Went into so much debt that they lost their home. She deserved nice things. Hired a hitman. Her husband wouldn't give her money for meth. Edit. Would or wouldn't. Sounds like a typical narcissist. Nothing is ever their fault. Went to magnet school in South Florida that was in a pretty bad neighborhood. The first year, we were segregated to our own floor and escorted everywhere. The second year, we weren't as supervised, but still had security around. The third year, we were released to the hounds. I, a tiny white kid, befriended a gigantic black student by making him a few things in woodshop class. He looked out for me and often stood in for me in a fight. I got jumped in the bathroom one day, and while walking back to class, bloody and crying, he saw me walk past his class. He came out and asked me what was up. I pointed to the two kids that jumped me, and he cornered them and got my money, plus some back. Told them to never fuck with me again. The last day of school was an absolute war zone. We literally had SWAT across the street trying to keep the fights to a minimum. My buddy ran with me and other students to the bus to keep our scrawny little white asses from getting killed. Well, about 4 years later, I was watching the news, and he popped up on a wanted segment. He was wanted for murder of 3 people. The 3 people were gang members, but the way he did it caught the public eye. They rolled up on a busy intersection in Miami and he was across the street with some homies. He walked up to the car and executed the driver, then the passenger in the back. The front passenger got out, but was hit by a car that was getting the hell out of there. He walked around and shot that guy a few times. He then walked back to the homies, handed them the gun and left. He was caught in Alabama later that year and was shot by the police when stepping out of the house. Edit. Horace Man Middle for all of those wondering. Located in lovely El Portal. Only a stone's throw from the Pork and Beans projects. I know someone who was best friends with Dennis Rader all through childhood up until he was identified as BTK. Rader is in a fuckload of their childhood photos because they were always at each other's houses growing up. It messed up every member of that immediate family when it became undeniable that Rader was BTK. To say they had no idea would be a massive understatement. It caused its own kind of trauma trying to acknowledge that these seemingly separate entities were actually the same person, one who they trusted and allowed around their kids. They were also forced to accept that they were with him immediately before or after some of the crimes. Knowing you spent those years terrified of BTK and then realizing he was in your house the whole time is a unique kind of minfuck. My ex-father-in-law worked at a trucking company in Renton across from a Kenworth truck assembly plant. He would stop at a convenience store every day at 5 AM and get coffee, and there was always a guy that he would talk to and make small talk with. He introduced himself as Gary. A few years later, he was watching the news and Gary's picture came up on the TV. Apparently, it was Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. He said he was a normal guy, nothing abnormal about far conversations. My best friend's sister who had schizophrenia went off her meds and killed her mother. The family was already reeling from having lost their father. He had developed lung cancer, and when they were doing a biopsy of his lung, the DR slipped and punctured a vein or something, triggering a heart attack and a stroke. He never recovered from the stroke and died 10 days later. The mother was an invalid that he had been the primary caretaker with the help of their daughter. And while on her meds she was able to help her mother as needed. But once the father died, there was no one checking if she was taking her meds, and she eventually slid off of them. She became obsessed with the thought that her mother was trying to cut her out of the will or something. And she took a knife to her one day. She tried to cover it up, claiming someone else came in and attacked her. But the evidence was too clear and her story was very incoherent. It destroyed the entire family. My friend is still broken by the event years later. Within a couple of months he went from having both of his parents and a loving sister to everyone being effectively gone. She made the news and was fairly infamous. People still give their house a cold shoulder in the neighborhood. Aspects of my life are pretty hellacious. I live with severe chronic pain and other issues, but I'll look at what happened to him and tell myself someone always has it worse. Something similar happened to my high school classmate. He seemed fine while I knew him, but developed schizophrenia after high school. Early 20s is a common age of onset. He was being treated and able to live his life. He even got engaged. Then his psychiatrist moved away and dropped the ball, making sure his treatment didn't lapse while he transitioned to a new doctor. He ended up running out of his medication despite both he and his family trying to contact both doctors trying to get more. He started to become agitated and his dad took him to their house to try to keep him safe and calm. But he began to believe that his dad was an android lookalike that had killed his real parents and was trying to trap him there and kill him. His dad called his mother and fiancé to come help, but he ended up stabbing his father to death with a kitchen knife before they could get there. His family was supportive of him and he was very close with his dad. I can't imagine coming to the realization that you've killed your own father in a fit of delusion. Just a horrible tragedy for the entire family. Side story, I found out about it when I received a call at work from a reporter. He asked me if I knew, classmate, and what he was like. I said we went to high school together and was pretty normal, then joked why? Did he kill someone? I worked with a guy when I was 14 who was just a complete dick. No regard for compassion. Went to high school with him and his younger brother. I bought some green from him, waited 4 hours, and didn't get what I paid for. 4 years later comes into the restaurant where I was working, ordered food, and then disappeared for an hour. They were about to call the cops for a dine and dash when he walked in, and it was obvious he had been shooting heroin behind the building. He couldn't pay for his food because his gift card was worthless. They end up kicking him out. So chaotic. A couple of months later I'm at a gas station and he is high on heroin again and slowly counting pennies for a pack of cigarettes. I thought about buying his smokes to save myself time, but remembered he jacked me. Years later he is on the news for murder. He was drunk and high at a bar at 11 AM and drove home, ran over a guy getting his mail, and continued home. Parked on his front lawn and went to bed. The story should be over, but no. Years later, on the news for murder. His brother, who I took shop class with and was a much better person, was drunk and high, driving home and ran over a 10-year-old who was on a bicycle, crossing a crosswalk. Same prison, same time. Was never charged because he committed suicide immediately after the murders when cornered by police, but my childhood next door neighbor. They lived behind us in our neighborhood and when I was 6 and he was 5, we were friends and would play together. I witnessed him receiving his 4th concussion to that point when he ran headfirst into a low fence while trying to catch a football. We moved away when I was 7, but when I turned 17 I saw the news story about him murdering his parents and babysitter. He had a babysitter because, multiple early childhood concussions and brain issues. The cops eventually cornered the babysitter's stolen car he was fleeing in and he shot himself before he could be apprehended. Hadn't seen the kid in 10 years but it really fucked me up to think about it when I found out. Edit to say that I misremembered some of the details, had to look it up again. He killed the babysitter and a counselor or authority figure of some sort who was overseeing him. His parents were divorced and out of town when the incident occurred. He was an asshole. I live in a small southern town, so football is king here. The environment is toxic because everyone knows that football players are untouchable and the ones whose parents had money had ultimate privilege. This guy is one of those guys. He was rude, cocky, and about as dumb as a rock. Mommy and daddy bought him a brand new Mustang, which he wrecked BC he was speeding in the rain and ran it into a gully. He was rewarded for his stupidity with a brand new Ford Raptor, which he had for roughly a year before he ran an elderly couple off the road because he was trying to pass 5 cars on a blind hill and the old man had to swerve to prevent from being hit head on. The couple was fine, but I remember hearing him joke and laugh about the incident later. Naturally, he had an ever-revolving door of girlfriends, which he constantly cheated on. Once we were at a party, which was at a small hunting cabin in the middle of nowhere. Country kids are weird as hell at having fun lol. He got caught fucking a girl outside by his girlfriend who was literally standing 10 feet away from him but talking to her friends. That's how bold this guy was. Total douche. Anyway, after graduation, I went to college in the biggest city close to our hometown, which was about an hour away. About 2 years later, I was watching the local news, and I hear a story about a homeless man who was the victim of a hit and run. Apparently, he was in the downtown area and was riding his bike in a bike lane, and someone hit and left him to die alone in the street. A week or so later, the story pops up again and it was high school arsehole's mugshot. He was a limo driver, I guess he started his own business? IDR, and he had been drinking heavily before getting in his big ass limo and murdering a man in the street. He tried to hide the damages to the limo, which only directed attention straight to him, and was convicted of manslaughter. He goes up for parole in 2027. Thanks for watching. Please press the like button if you enjoyed and the notification bell next to the subscribe button to never miss another video. Let me know your thoughts below. Bye.